Welcome to Same Day, Different Century. I'm Zach. Today is July 6th. On the morning of July 6th, 1942, three people walked through the streets of Amsterdam in the rain: Otto, Edith, and 13-year-old Anne Frank. They wore layers of clothing because carrying suitcases was too dangerous. Their elder daughter, Margot, had already been rushed ahead separately by bicycle to minimize the risk of arrest. They were a family fractured by immediate necessity. This is the story of the day the Frank family went into hiding. Otto Frank was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1889. A decorated World War I veteran, a businessman, and by all accounts a devoted husband and father. He and his wife Edith had two daughters, Margot the elder and Anne the younger. The Franks lived a comfortable, thoroughly assimilated Jewish life in Frankfurt. Then came 1933. Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January of that year. Within months, it was clear that Germany under National Socialism was no longer a safe place for Jewish families. Otto Frank read the signs early. He moved his family to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, a country with a long tradition of tolerance, a country he believed could protect them. For 7 years, it worked. Otto established the Dutch brand of a company called Opekta that sold pectin, a gelling agent used in making jam. In late 1940, he would move its offices to a building on the Prinsengracht Canal, the building that would become their hiding place. His daughters went to school. Anne, in particular, was vivid, social, and sharp, a girl who loved to write. Then, on May 10, 1940, Germany invaded the Netherlands. The Dutch surrendered in 5 days. Over the next 2 years, Dutch Jews were stripped of their rights, layer by layer, with bureaucratic precision. They were barred from public parks, swimming pools, cinemas, and restaurants. Jewish children were removed from public schools and forced into segregated institutions. Jews were required to register with authorities and wear a yellow Star of David sewn visibly onto their clothing at all times. Jewish-owned businesses were gradually seized, forced into non-Jewish ownership, or liquidated. Curfews were imposed, and deportations, which the Nazi regime euphemistically called labor deployment to the east, began accelerating through the summer of 1942. Otto Frank had been watching and preparing. In the rear section of his office building at Prinsengracht 263, behind the main working floors and above the warehouse, there were several unused rooms accessible by a steep, narrow staircase. Otto began quietly converting them into a livable space, furnishing them and stocking them with food and supplies. He told almost no one. The people he did tell were his most trusted employees: Miep Gies, his secretary, Johannes Kleiman and Victor Kuhler, his bookkeeper and manager, and Bep Voskow, an office worker. All four agreed to help sustain whoever would hide there. They were fully aware of the consequences. In Nazi-occupied Netherlands, helping Jews carried enormous risks, including imprisonment, deportation to concentration camps, and in some cases, execution. Otto's plan was to move his family into the hiding place on July 16, 1942. Then, on the afternoon of Sunday, July 5th, a call-up notice arrived at the Frank apartment. It was addressed to Margot. She was 16 years old. The SS was ordering her to report for labor service, a summons the family believed would lead to deportation to a labor camp. The plan moved up 10 days, overnight. Anne Frank had just turned 13 3 weeks earlier on June 12th. For her birthday, she had received a diary, a red and white checkered notebook she had admired and picked out herself. She had already begun writing in it. When Miep Gies received an urgent call on the evening of July 5th, she came to the Frank apartment and carried away the first load of belongings to the hiding place. The Frank family did not sleep that night. They spent the hours packing what little they could bring without drawing suspicion: books, letters, and essential clothing. Before leaving, Otto Frank wrote a note and left it behind at the apartment, deliberately worded to suggest the family had fled to Switzerland, to send anyone looking for them in the wrong direction. At 7:30 a.m. on Monday, July 6, 1942, they left. They couldn't take a taxi, it would have been too conspicuous, and Jews were barred from most forms of public transportation, so they walked in the rain. Anne wore 2 vests, 3 pairs of trousers, a dress, a skirt, a jacket, a summer coat, 2 pairs of stockings, heavy shoes, a wool cap, and a scarf. All in July. Because when you can't carry a bag, you wear what you can. The walk from their apartment to the Prinsengracht was roughly 2 miles through the heart of Amsterdam. They arrived and climbed the stairs, and the world, in a sense, sealed itself behind them. The hiding place would eventually be known as the Achterhuis, Dutch for the back house. In English, we know it as the secret annex. Its entrance was later concealed behind a movable bookcase, a precaution added after they had moved in. Behind it, several small cramped rooms spread across 2 upper floors and a tiny attic. 8 people would ultimately live in that space. 1 week after the Franks arrived, on July 13, 1942, the Van Pels family joined them. Herman Van Pels, a business partner of Otto's, his wife August, and their teenage son Peter. Then, in November 1942, a dentist named Fritz Pfeffer arrived, sharing a room with Anne. They couldn't make noise during business hours when workers occupied the warehouse below. They moved through the rooms in socks. They flushed the toilet only during certain windows of time. They listened in secret to the BBC and to Radio Oranje, the Dutch government in exile's broadcasts from London. They read, they argued, they fell into the rhythms that confinement forces on human beings, a compressed, heightened version of ordinary life. Anne Frank wrote. She wrote constantly and obsessively in her diary, which she addressed to fictional correspondents, primarily one named Kitty. She wrote about boredom and terror and irritation and hope and the people crowded around her. She wrote about who she was and who she intended to become. In March of 1944, she heard a radio broadcast from the Dutch government in exile in London, encouraging citizens to preserve diaries and personal records as historical documentation of the occupation. Anne responded by going back through her earlier entries and rewriting them, revising, shaping, and imagining them as a book that people might one day read. She was 14 years old. On August 4th, 1944, after 761 days in hiding, the secret annex was discovered. An SS officer of the German Security Service, accompanied by Dutch police collaborators, arrived at Prinsengracht 263. All 8 people concealed in the annex were arrested. 2 of the helpers, Kleiman and Kugler, were arrested as well. Who informed on them has never been conclusively established. The question has been investigated for decades, and it remains one of the most debated open questions in Holocaust history. The 8 were sent first to the Westerbork transit camp in the Netherlands, then deported to Auschwitz in early September 1944. As Soviet forces advanced toward the camp in the fall, Margot and Anne were transferred westward to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in Germany. Edith Frank died in Auschwitz on January 6, 1945. Margot Frank died at Bergen-Belsen, most likely in late February or early March of 1945. Anne Frank died shortly after. Historians believe in February or March of 1945, just weeks before British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen on April 15th. She was 15 years old. Of the 8 people who hid in the secret annex, only 1 survived. Otto Frank was liberated from Auschwitz by Soviet forces in January 1945. After his return, once the deaths of Anne and Margot were confirmed in the summer of 1945, Miep Gies, who with Bep Voskow had gathered the checked album, notebooks, and loose pages after the arrest, gave them to Otto, having kept them in case Anne returned. Otto Frank read his daughter's diary. He recognized in her words a person he felt he had not fully known. He spent years working to have it published. The diary appeared in Dutch in 1947 under the title Het Achterhuis, The Secret Annex. It has since been translated into more than 70 languages. Tens of millions of copies have been sold. It is among the most widely read first-hand accounts of the Holocaust ever put into print. July 6, 1942, is not the day Anne Frank became a symbol known across the world. It is the day a 13-year-old girl, along with her family, made a desperate decision to disappear. They walked through Amsterdam in the rain, carrying what they could on their backs, and they climbed a staircase into a hidden set of rooms, hoping that the world outside would eventually change enough to let them come back out. It didn't, but the words she wrote while she waited did not disappear with her. That same day, different century. I'm Zach. We'll be back tomorrow with another date, another story. Thanks for listening. Hey guys, it's Zach. Real quick before you go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed the show, all I ask is that you share it with someone that you think would enjoy it too. That's the best way to help us out. I'll see you tomorrow.